Phil, Kenny, so glad to have you here. I'm familiar and warmed up with you both, obviously, but tell our viewers, our subscribership, who you are, what you do, and more so about like what you're passionate about.
Good Lord. We have 45 minutes, right?
Yeah, 45.
We'll try and
go.
Yeah, go. So I guess I mean what we do together. So I'm Phil Chang, and you'll hear from Kenny in a second. We together we're This Commerce Life. We started as a retail podcast focused on small medium businesses. Both of us love retail. We love the business of retail. We love the process that brands go through to get to retailers, the selling process, the interaction with consumers. So we've got a 5-year-old podcast now. That's always a surprise to us, I think, as we started it to talk to each other, really. We've just been able to talk to some really wonderful brands. So that's probably the first thing. The second thing is This Commerce Life then spun into, because we got lots of those questions, is people saying, wow, you guys are really experienced, insert old experience, but you guys have a lot of experience in retail, and we'd love to be able for you to help us, right? And so out of that came, what we have been calling the fractional COO part of the business,
right?
Or what you really read into that is temporary expertise to help you scale your business. So so the two of us, we've been at that part. It's relatively new, probably
it's new.
Yeah, 3-4 months, I
3
think.
months, 4 months.
It's gotten a little busy. So that's kind of what This Commerce Life is. And then I think the really short bit, so Kenny doesn't fall asleep completely, is while he's waiting for his turn, is
I don't care. You talk.
He's being really patient today.
I'm good. I'm happy right now. I'm not cleaning. I'm really enjoying this.
So I come from primarily the brand side of things. So I've worked for guys like J&J and Pfizer and Revlon and Danone. Done everything from sales to marketing to trade marketing. Went over to the retail side to do, to work with a retailer, and then also to work retail startup as well. So I kind of have like brand, retail, tech startup in my background. So, you read, bored easily, need things to amuse me, so off I go, is kind of what you read into that. So that's kind of me, and then I'll shut up and let Kenny do his thing.
Yes,
that's fine. I'm glad you took care of all this Commerce Life, because you did it better than I was going to do. So I'm Kenny Vannucci. I've been in retail since I was 14, so 42 years now. I grew up in a small town in the interior, and I worked in the local shoe repair for years. I worked in a stereo shop for a while. I worked in a stationery store. And then when I came to Vancouver to go to university, I worked at a wholesaler or distributor of stationery products. I was a sales rep for a little while with a stationery company. And then I went to London Drugs, where I worked in the stores, and then went into the buying office for 15 or 16 years of buying. I was 26 years with them in total, 26, yeah, something like that.
Wow.
I have owned brands. I still own a few brands. So I own a coffee company, 2 coffee companies, an import company, a small tea company. I was joking before the smell-o-vision, because I smell like pine sol right now and disinfectants. I got involved with some buddies. I have no idea why I'm doing this, but we just took over an iconic corner grocer in Vancouver. So I'm back into retail, like retail. So I've been on the phone the last couple of days trying to get deals and figure things out. So like for me, I've been in retail like literally the whole time. Like I don't seem to get too far away before it pulls me back in. So that's sort of my where I'm at, or what I've done. So
that's fantastic.
And then I get to work with Phil, and I get to talk to Ange once in a while. So life's pretty good. Really.
Yeah, life's pretty good.
In the grand scheme of things, if this is the worst it gets, this is all good.
Yeah, exactly. Have to do what you love and be around people that lift you up, right?
100%.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah. I'm curious, guys, can we jam today on the concept or the thought process around supporting scaling teams or supporting teams as businesses grow. I think it's really important to highlight the fact that as business owners, there's almost this triad that goes on. It's what we wish for or want to do, what we say that we're going to do, and then what we actually do. And when it comes to scaling teams and our business, there's a lot to consider. And I want to get your thoughts and maybe some anecdotal stories, if you will, open to being vulnerable around some learnings with regards to scaling a team. Because when, you know, sitting from my seat from a people and culture perspective, oftentimes, you know, you really have to kind of hit CEOs on the head or make it pointingly obvious as to what we could potentially lose if we're not considering the human capital side of our business as we continue to scale.
Wow.
Wow.
Doing a little filtering. I guess.
Because you're going to have to
in my
filter
head,
better than I'm going to. So doing a lot of filtering.
I think what pops for me first is, I think if you are listening to this and you are thinking of scaling or you are scaling, I think if you're the leader of an org, the first thing you have to realize is you're a leader of an org. It's funny, yesterday, Kenny and I were talking to another contractor who does marketing services, you know, no different than kind of what we do. And we were laughing about some of the, sympathizing about some of the trademarks that you see right away with, you know, entrepreneurs or like small business owners who think they want to be bigger, but haven't made the turn, if you will, right? So when you're an owner, you're used to doing everything on your own. It's, you know, it's a tried and true formula. You rely on yourself. The inspiration is from you. You have to have a certain amount of stubbornness and no fear, right? Is because everyone will say, you can't do it, you can't do it. And you build that kind of like ironclad, I can do it, I'm gonna make it, screw you guys, I gotta get it done. And then, but when you want to scale, I feel like the first thing that those folks need to do is to stop thinking like an owner and start thinking like a CEO.
Right.
And so one is about like, I can do it. And then when you make the turn is, I'm not supposed to do it. Somebody else needs to do it, and they can do it better than me, right? Which is a fundamental change in how things work. I think it starts there to me.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
to layer into that, I think that there's also different team member things that we have to consider when we're at 0 to 10 employees versus 10 to 20 versus 20 to 30 and 30 plus, et cetera, right? Because we know that there's different stages and different phases of what we're going through. So, you know, from a peopling side of things, like how are we consistently recruiting our team members or our employees? You know, how are we onboarding them to the organization so that, you know, they're feeling valued as soon as they get through the door? Because we know, especially in the retail space right now, you know, speaking to your demographic and the tech space, it's an employees market in general, but more so in these two demographics that we're seeing. And then it's the other kind of what I would call your root system for your human programs. So how are you showing that your team members are valued, and how are you engaging with them consistently? And that means different things through different phases and stages of your business. So it doesn't have to be this heavy, complex, expensive system out of the gates. It can be super simple, like, hey, Kenny, what's up, man? You know, what was going on this weekend? Like, that's your check-in when you're at 10 to 20 people. Then it's like, you know, even within that piece of it. So, hey, you know, let's talk about some goals and co-create them. And then as you continue to grow, it can get more formalized and consistent, because then you know more so of who you are as an organization and kind of how you're quote unquote growing up into the team members, so that when new people come on board, they're not having a totally different experience than your tried and true team, right? Yeah, for sure.
It's a tough one though, because what sort of Phil was at is that a lot of these owners, founders, whatever you want to call them, when they're at that 5 to 10 employees, they're still doing probably a lot of things, right? and they're doing things they probably really shouldn't be doing ultimately, but don't know maybe who to pass it to, etc. Onboarding in small companies is typically non-existent. Understanding team dynamics is pretty much non-existent. What most have to learn is, I'm great. It's great that you can put a puck in the net, but can you actually show someone else how to put a puck in the net? Like I always go back to sports. You got to go from being the player to really being the coach.
Yes.
And you have to understand what that transition means. That means you delegate, and delegate doesn't mean you just throw shit on people's desks and walk away. That's just not it. Delegate is teaching, putting it on the desk, following up, understanding what you're good at and maybe what you're not good at, hiring a good assistant coach potentially. But see, this is where I think they most fall apart, because most entrepreneurs or founders, until we've done enough of them, think they can do it all.
Yeah.
And if they could do it all, then why are they talking to anybody about anything? Just go do it.
Right.
But what they soon find out, there's only X amount of hours in a day. And quite frankly, you can't do it all. And you can't do it all well.
Yeah.
Right?
Guys, tell me more, like when it comes to either, lessons that you've learned through other owners or even yourself, how can you further paint that picture of going from player to coach?
Like I always go back to sports. You got to go from being the player to really being the coach.
Yes.
And you have to understand what that transition means. That means you delegate, and delegate doesn't mean you just throw shit on people's desks and walk away. That's just not it. Delegate is teaching, putting it on the desk, following up, understanding what you're good at and maybe what you're not good at, hiring a good assistant coach potentially. But see, this is where I think they most fall apart, because most entrepreneurs or founders, until we've done enough of them, think they can do it all.
Yeah.
And if they could do it all, then why are they talking to anybody about anything? Just go do it.
Right.
But what they soon find out, there's only X amount of hours in a day. And quite frankly, you can't do it all. And you can't do it all well.
I think one of the things that I have seen Kenny do so well, and it sounds really dumb. It's not dumb because it's incredibly smart and it's hard to do. But everywhere that Kenny's been that I've been, I've heard him say, well, did you tell him that? Right? Did you tell him that? And it's kind of funny, right? Because you kind of go,
it's fair.
Yeah, because you kind of go, look, like when you're on the ice, like if we use the sports analogy, when you're a player on the ice, you are constantly communicating, right? Because if you're a winger, you're trying to get the ball, you're trying to get the puck, you're trying to score, you're like, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. So whoever's carrying the puck, you're going, I'm here, go there, look out, somebody's on you, defend, watch the goalie, those sort of things.
Right.
And then something happens when they step off the ice and behind the bench, because all of a sudden they know, hey, we're gonna, here's the strategy and we're gonna go score. But then they kind of like, they pick the best players and they throw them out on the ice and that's it, right? And they kind of go, well I brought you all in, why aren't you doing the thing, right?
Definitely.
And and Kenny, if nothing else, I think that's a really good one, is I've heard Kenny say that multiple times to lots of these founders, is he just says, listen, did you tell them that, and did they understand it, right? So if you told them, right, because we've just been through some experiences where we also had a founder that told his people in a way that suited him or that it made sense to him,
right?
But his people were like, wait, that's not the way it came out. I didn't know that was I didn't. That's not what you said to me, or that's not what I heard, right? Like,
exactly.
It's how you hear.
Yeah.
Like I would notice it a lot with people. Like someone, I mean, be a bad example, but my wife will be sitting there and someone will say hello, right? And just the simple word hello, we'll look at each other and she'll have one take. Was that like hello, or is that like hello? And I'll be looking at it another way. And that, that's a stupid example, but
wait,
that's
so when I come over,
it.
Does she ask those questions?
No, she likes,
because I really mean hello. Like, okay.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Like when I've had that with her, and I'm thinking, like,
definitely,
how the hell did you get that out of that? Like, that's not what I heard. I heard, and she was looking, she goes, what did you mean you heard that? That's not what they said. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? That's exactly what they said.
Right.
So to me, like I'm always telling Phil or the people we talk to is like, it's not just, did you tell them? When you told them, did they actually understand what you were trying to tell them?
Right.
Because a lot of times, like, you could say something to me, Ange, and I look at you and I heard you
Yeah.
and I processed it,
Yes.
but I might have processed it in a way that you didn't intend it to be processed. But how do I know that? Because I hear what I hear, and I've got my mechanics in my brain, and it just goes a certain direction. Now, sometimes it's on point, and others, I might have heard it verbatim, clear as a bell to me, and with the result that we both looked at, thought, what?
Yeah.
Well, there's so many different layers of filters in the sense of what I always call as analogy of what's in your backpack, right? So we have our own behavioral styles. We have our own levels of, how we interpretate things, sometimes trauma, emotional intelligence, like there's so many different quadrants or quotants that makes us us, which is special. But at the same time, it makes us a complex being when it comes to communication. And using your analogy and hanging on to the hockey kind of world, when you step into the coaching realm or the position from player, I feel like the biggest lesson is learning that you're responsible for your players. You're now responsible for your team members and their well-being. It's not about, did you hit your objectives? Did you hit your goals? Did you score a goal for us? It's, how are you doing? What's going on? Did you understand what I said? Can we co-create? Can we get more curious, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm really curious, guys, like, how did you learn that lesson? How did you learn such a strong lesson of going from player to coach?
I think I was told. I was told by other leaders when I was mostly probably at London, where they would come up to me and say, do you know what you just said? And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm pretty clear. I know what I just said. But would you like to know what I heard? And I'm thinking, well, I don't know now, like maybe not. But and they say, well, this is what I heard. And I'm going to tell you what that person heard. And I'm going to tell you that person heard. And I'd be looking, I said, but I didn't say that. They said, well, again, it's not what you heard yourself say, but I'm telling you right now, that's what they heard. And that's what they're using to interpret what you've done. I'm thinking, okay, so you know what I mean? So sometimes the lessons learned, like you could be the best player on the ice. It does not mean you'll ever be a great coach. Right. And typically guys like Jordan was a phenomenal basketball player.
Yes.
But he was all about Jordan 247. Ego the size of a building and a shitty coach. Because you could never make the transition of understanding you had to teach people. Not everybody has the God-given skills you have. And not everybody can do what you do. And a person like that would probably been better off to hire a good assistant so that person maybe is the one that does sort of the communicating or playing, because that's a level of emotional intelligence. Like there's certain things I know if I say it, I know me and I know how I'm going to go. And I can always typically feel my wife behind me saying, you're not going to get this across. You really like, it is not going to come across the way you think it's going to come across. And I'm looking at her thinking, no, I know I can do it. She's thinking, no, you are not going to get this across. Your mind frame is not right. It's not going to go the way you want. Usually with the kids, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because I would usually come back and she goes, how do you think that went? And I'd be thinking, well, shit, obviously not good because that's why we're asking me. Right? Because obviously I've gone sideways and I know I've done something wrong. So I guess the coaching moment, okay, let's coach the so-called coach, because apparently I've done a shitty job on this one. And I know. So to me, it's just, I think it's learning to understand that you're not good at everything. And I think, Phil, if you want, not even so much the last founder, numerous founders we've talked to, they just think they can do it all.
Right.
You can't. Like you've got to understand you're good at some things and not good at some. Okay.
A lot to unpack there, Kenny, in the sense of, kudos to you for letting go of your ego and stepping into curiosity, both in the workplace and at home. Kudos to your wife for her level of self-awareness for you and on your behalf to continue to guide you. But all this to say is that from a leadership perspective, what I'm hearing and seeing, Kenny, is that, through mentorship in coming up in your quote unquote experience, is that things like being humble and curious are super important.
I think they're critical.
In being a coach or the CEO or COO, whatever you are. It's really important to check in and pause. So instead of just dumping something on someone's desk and expecting them to get it right the first time, it's like, okay, so how do you want to co-create this, right? So this is the first time you're doing this. There's higher risk in the company. what can it look like so we can have some touch points and then empower you to do it 100% by yourself next time. I think that's kind of what I'm hearing. And also hearing things like being open to feedback, regardless of who it is within your organization. And I can tell you within my own growth and kind of getting vulnerable here, the Ange 3 years ago would not sit in front of a group and say, hey, can you critique me on, on my video or my presentation or
tough.
my pitch, right?
Yeah.
I could not do that at that point. I did it 2 months ago and I didn't even think about it. And my team, the first thing that they said to me was, are you sure right now? Like, do you want us to take it away and then give you written feedback? And I'm like, no, like we're doing a working meeting. So let's hear what we have to say here.
Yeah.
It's okay. Safe space. We're all flipping friends here. Right. And it took them a minute and we're all coaches and consultants, right? We play in this space. It took them a minute to really adjust to that concept of, I'm going to give my CEO and co-founder feedback and she's going to be okay with it. And it was, a huge learning opportunity for me and the team to be like, okay, so this is a safe space to speak, which is, in a long-about way. Another point that's really important is being a coach. You have to show the actions to your team members, regardless of what size your organization is, to have those communication touch points so that they don't feel like they're asking a silly question or they don't feel like they're burdening you with time because you're busy, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, lots to unpack.
That's just being accessible. That's just being, that's your role. Now, at the same time, and we told people, like, even in all our experiences, there's times where I'm going to ask you, but just so we're all very clear, because I'm going to own this. Like, it's my responsibility and I'm accountable. Right. I still make the decision the way I want to make this decision.
Exactly.
Like, it's all, it's not just because, but that doesn't mean I don't want input. It doesn't mean I'm not listening.
That's fair.
And even that communicating needs to be done so that people understand, okay, he or she is sort of the boss or the one who's going to own this. They still value what I said and they're weighing it out. But sometimes, I'm just going to go my own way and see what happens.
Definitely.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not always, you can't always be collaborative and not everything, like sooner or later someone
I agree with you.
And say, this is how we're doing it.
Definitely.
And that's still a good leader.
And I think it's so important. I think you're really pointing at something, Kenny, in the sense of, as a leader, another responsibility is to understand ourselves, understand our team, what motivates them, but more importantly, understand what tools are in our tool belt as a leader. Sometimes we're the coach. Sometimes we're the mentor. Sometimes we're going to pull up the coach for our team members to come in and have a vent session and just throw shit on the table. But other times, depending on the environment and the context, we're going to be more democratic in the sense of, thank you so much for your input, but this is ultimately where we're going with it. I just want to inform you, et cetera, et cetera. So knowing when to pull those, what I would call leadership levers, are really important as well, especially when your team is scaling. And I think that comes with not just a level of experience, but a level of intent, because you can be a seasoned leader and be complacent as well, right? And what I've seen in past is that, I've worked for some amazing leaders, but just because of the headspace that they were in or what was going on within their business, maybe they were doing a merger acquisition or trying to close another deal, they missed a lot of opportunities internally with their executive or their leaders to be able to mentor them so that they can then delegate and move on to the next deal. So it's being sure that you're checking in with yourself and still staying intentional regardless of where you're at.
Or even being open to your team telling you that, listen, Ange, I know you're busy, but you're not really here. And having the ability then as a leader to say, you know what, I appreciate that. And maybe you have a team under you. Again, being a leader, you really need to know yourself, what you're capable of, what you're doing in a moment. Do you have other team members that can pitch? Right. Can help out when you need to help out. Because to your point, you could be doing a million other things and there's still other things happening behind you. Right. Like, you got to be aware of a lot of things. Like,
definitely. And I think too, I guess where my head's going, thinking about the concept around supporting scaling teams, it's as soon as predictably possible as a leader, knowing where you're going with your organization. Gone are the days of 5 to 10 year planning. We know this, but within the next year, what do you need to tell your team members? And, how can you inform them and include them as soon as predictably possible? Because thinking about my current clients and even in my own business in the past year, we've done at least 2 or 3 pivots. And then for our clients, we've helped them through communications around 2 or 3 pivots themselves, right? So I can think of multiple examples where it's so important to be able to identify that there's a strong vision, but creating that balance of a flexible mindset in the sense that based on the environment, we might be doing A, maybe we're going to B, and I'm going to let you know as soon as we get there. And in the meantime, here's what I need from you. Because what I've seen with some organizations where they're trying to scale and grow is that when they go to pivot, they miss the opportunity to have those communication or those one-on-one touch points with key team members. And it results in frustration, chaos, issues that really aren't needed if we're transparent but steady at the same time.
It's it's funny because the parallels to some, if you're a marketer and you have to put together a briefing process, and that it's funny how a lot of people can make that leap, but they can't make that leap internally, because when you go, if you need something designed, if you need a video shot, if you need something creative that's well outside your expertise, you put together a brief. You tell the agency, you tell the creator, this is what I want to accomplish. Here's how I would like to accomplish it. And then here's what it should look like when it's done. But when we say, here's what it should look like, it doesn't mean I'm saying I want a stick figure here and I want them. What I'm saying is I need to be able to deliver this message. Go out and build me the best version of that possible, right? And then you have to be comfortable with what comes back, right? But you also have to tell them, look, I'm philosophically opposed to cats. Don't put a cat in the video, whatever the, kind of like things are. And it's funny because in that process of growing, it's almost like what we need to keep doing is briefing our teams, right? Like that ability to keep your team on track and yet give them enough room involves, here's where we want to go. Here are the taboo things or the things you cannot do. Everything else is fair game. I don't know what it's going to look like, because if like on it, even the three of us, if I said, draw me a garden, the three of us would come up with something totally different. But at the end of the day, that's what I want, right? Like, it's a funny.
I totally understand what you're saying. It's that, here's the visionary picture. Here's where we're pretty sure where we're going to go.
Yeah.
The work that you're currently doing is meaningful and may not shift too much. And by the way, we're going to have this continuous flow of communication. So you know exactly where we're at and where that vision solidifies as we continue to move through, right? So it could be with regards to rounds of funding if you're on the tech side, or it could be with regards to supply logistics if you're on the retail side of things. In the NGO space, what we're dealing a lot with is, how do we figure out partnership projects to mitigate risk and costs? And how do we go about ensuring that we're still going to get continuation of grant funding? The other thing that's kind of coming up for me at this point in time is like, what is the biggest lesson that you can identify that you've seen, either self-identified or through others, that is so important when we're scaling a team that we need to know?
I could take this one sort of, Phil, maybe to start, because you'll probably spin it into better wording than I'm going to. But one of the things I think you definitively need to do when you're starting to talk scaling and you have an existing team, once you've been helped a little bit, potentially coached yourself as a leader, because a leader can always be coached, the coach can be coached, is I think what you constantly need to do is do what most don't do well quickly enough, is evaluate the team as you're going. There may be team members that were really good in the 5 to 10 person company, but in the 15 to 20, their skill set may not be what you need or the company needs to scale.
Definitely.
That could be yourself even. So again, this is where the assistant coaches or something comes in. You may be the impediment, that you're going to be the problem or the reason why we can't scale.
Right.
Many times it's also the team Like there are people that you may want them to play center, go back to hockey, but they're defenders.
Right.
And if you need centermen or center people, and that's what you need, you ain't going to make it out of a defenseman or a goalie. Like you may just have to change the team.
Right.
And that's a hard one for a lot of people, because especially
it's extremely hard.
A lot of those people were from day one, and they may be wonderful people and you want to be friends for life, but it may not be good for the future of the business and in terms of scaling. So I think that's one of those ones you have to really continue to evaluate yourself, evaluate your team.
Yeah.
Are the right people in the right seats? Are we all capable of doing this?
Exactly.
I don't think that's one thing we do very well as anybody, Phil. And I don't know if you can talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the
problem.
retail tech startups I work for, of the original 6, I was part of the original 6. And I think when we got to the first 20, 2 of the original 6 dropped off because they just didn't have any more fun, right? Like the fun parts for them were, I get to go out and build this thing. We don't know what the rules are and we don't know what we need. So I'll just go out and build it. Cool. Right. And then they're actually quite good at team skills, but they didn't want to be part of a team. They were just good at doing what they do. And then when we hit 50, we lost 2 more of the original 2. Right. Because they were like, this is not fun anymore. Now I have to have like this kind of confined desk. I need to be able to put it together a role. And I don't like sitting at this desk all the time. I want to be able to go over there. I want to be able to do that. And I'm not doing that anymore. And then I think I was one of the last ones to drop, the originals to drop off, because I just said, okay, now we're getting big. We were crossing 50 to 100. I don't really like, now I have to follow the rules and I suck at following rules and I don't want to, even the rules I wrote, I don't really want to follow them. So it's time for me to go.
Right? Not you, Phil.
Yeah. But it is a thing, right? Like it's true.
It's definitely a thing.
Like,
you can outgrow your team can outgrow you.
100%.
Whatever, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's why it's so important to kind of have your people and culture guardrails in place, is what I call them. So anywhere's from one-on-one check-ins and just having the human conversations. Hey, Phil, how's it going? You know that we rolled out some of these new rules. How are you feeling about them? Hey, Kenny, just want to have a check-in point. Like we just did a big pivot. What's coming up for you? And, not kind of taxing those conversations all the time every week, but, knowing when to have those touch points with your team members around those specific topics. Yeah. And it's easy to do so once we build trust. So having continuous one-on-one conversations, maybe it's about operations one week, maybe it's about their training and development another week, etc., all the way up to those formal performance management programs, I think is really important.
You're listening though, Ange, right?
Yeah.
Listen to the answers, because if the answer may not be what you want, doesn't mean you keep going till you get the answer you want. Your answer may not be the right one.
I like that.
You know what it is?
No, there's those personality types in there for sure. Bill, you're like losing your shit right now because you know it's so true.
It's true.
Right.
I mean, that's where really usually steps in. You're not getting through to the kids. They're not listening. You're thinking, but I'm right. Doesn't matter.
Right.
Yeah. Pay attention to the program.
And I think I can lend and add to that. If we're passing judgment, we haven't spent enough time being curious, which means we don't have the full picture, even if we are sitting at the top of the seats or the top of the rows, right? For sure.
You get different answers. I mean, you think of the 2 statements. One is, you're not doing what I want you to do, right? And then the other statement is, what's holding you back from getting the job accomplished?
Right.
And they sound like the same thing, but they are not the same
totally
thing.
Different.
You get totally different answers out of those. And like, I don't know, like if you're struggling with supporting the team, those are the things that I would pay attention to, because what you come up with when you walk away from meeting with somebody, those are the things that are your first cues to say, are you in the right place? Are you doing it? Are you doing the right things? Are you supporting your team? Those are the right. Like we've had a lot of those where, like one was like, well, I set this person up and they came across and they're like pretty lackadaisical and they didn't seem to capitalize on the opportunity. And the first thing that Kenny and I asked that founder was, is she okay? Is she feeling okay? And like his answer was, I'm really disappointed because they didn't follow through. And it turned out right? Like I don't want to, you know, this founder has a wonderful personality, is a wonderful person. Both of us would call him a friend any day, and we do, right? But in that moment, he didn't ask that question, right? He was
Right.
like, I'm just disappointed because she didn't come through. And then when we asked, what came out of it was like pretty amazing, was I'm pregnant, I'm in my first trimester. And you went, so she was having an off day for a really valid reason, but
Right.
because you had already decided what the answer was, you didn't see it. You didn't see something wonderful, right? You saw terrible, right? So yeah.
Definitely. And I think that lends itself to the importance of emotional intelligence in leadership. That's case in point.
It's critical.
Right? Because when we're really getting to the crux of it, if we stay empathetic, if we stay curious, if we're exercising all of those great things from an EIQ perspective, then you don't get judgment and disappointment. You get answers and problems that you can co-solve with other people. There was an individual that we interviewed on the podcast, and what she said is that I don't believe that there's leadership. I believe that there's learnership, because you never stop learning.
Cool.
And that, you know, that hit kind of deep in the sense that it's a well put or succinct way to say, as leaders, again, it comes back down to our responsibility is to understand our organization, our partners, and our team members, most importantly. And in some circumstances, depending on the environment, context where we're at, sometimes we have to pull the punches and make the calls, and that's okay. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is, if it's not working within your team, asking yourself as a leader, what do I need to do to make this shift with my team? And
look in the mirror. Start there.
Exactly.
Start there. Because a lot of times it's probably you.
Very much so. Very much
right?
so.
I mean, as much as, you know, my world, obviously it's not me, it's everybody else, but you know, that's for most people, right?
Kenny, who's your coach?
I know it's
9
times out of 100, I definitely know it's me. And I'm reminded of that perpetually by a whole group of people.
Yeah.
What? No. I think when you're scaling, the hardest part of being a leader is being a leader. Like it's one of those things that you almost need. It's like being the perfect date all the time. Do you know what I mean? Like you gotta be on point. You gotta be engaging. You've got to have a sense of direction. You've got to be interesting, but you can't be too hard. You can't be too inflexible. Sometimes you have to be aggressive, and sometimes you have to back off, right?
Yeah. But I like to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm borrowing someone else's words when I say I think leadership is really about being that perfectly imperfect leader.
You have to.
In the sense that if we constantly walk around with the pressure that I have to be that perfect leader or that perfect date, then in some circumstances we can exhibit ourselves in an anxious way or a more assertive way, or come across totally.
What do you think your team's going to do?
The opposite way.
I want the team mimicking that. Be honest. If you're having a shitty day, tell me you have a shitty. I mean, try not to go crazy and, you know, take the office of.
But if you're having a bad
day, I'd rather you say, listen, you know what? I'm really not in a good space today. Okay, can I help you? Or do you want me just to stay the hell out of your way?
This is my point, right? This is exactly my point is you have to be all of those things, right? Because even in that example is I'm having a shitty day. You have to be a big enough leader to say, I didn't hire a team of therapists, so I'm not here to dump my laundry on you or my emotional baggage.
Yes.
That's not what it's for. So I have to be vulnerable enough to say I'm having a bad day, but then I have to be enough of a leader to say, could you please help me, because I don't think I can do this task because I'm having a really rough, I can't focus. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like,
and I'd add to that, I think it also has to do with pre-work, which backs into your culture. Right. So when things are going good, how do you set up an environment that it's, you know, goes back to that safe to fail shit, right? Like it's safe to identify if I'm having a good day or bad day. That doesn't mean I'm going to dump it on everybody else. So we're again setting guardrails or boundaries. It just means that I'm human and I'm bringing my whole intentional human self into the workplace.
Yeah. But I think you need to do that because nobody's perfect.
Yes, very much.
And the people who try for perfection all the time, to be honest with you, I don't want to be around them.
No.
Because it's pretentious. It's impossible.
Yes.
You can't do it.
Well,
So
look,
why
and
pretend?
you see those things, right? Like you also see like the leaders who want to be liked, right? Like we've worked with a bunch of leaders where they want to be liked, and
Yes.
that in turn makes them afraid to make decisions, right? Because they know the minute I say we're going to do it this way, it's going to make somebody angry.
I think what I'm hearing between the lines, Phil, is that from a leadership perspective, especially when you're trying to help your scaling team, it's figuring out somewhat of a balance. And I don't even know if I'd use the word balance. I'd say integration. So when you're working with your team, how are you integrating with them on a weekly basis? And all of that is the definition of everything we just talked about. So the operational stuff, the HR stuff, the leadership stuff, and then being able to also sit in a space where you can understand your team members and what they need. It's a balancing act, which, takes strength, because quite frankly, especially these days, we don't always have it. And, being able to have a strong behavioral team, I guess, is where I feel that there's a passion, because when your team's set up for success, they will work. They may not know how to do it fully, but if they can get you to 80% of where you need to go, then I think that's phenomenal. You're winning in today's economy, in my opinion. And I think it circles back to what Kenny said before. We have to take a long, hard look at our organization, how we're showing up, and who we are as a leader to ensure that, there is success for our teams.
It's hard. I think that's people have to understand. It's nothing, none of that is easy.
No.
But you have to do it, and again, I think what most people don't do, ask for help. Like rebound things off other people who are maybe not so attached to it. You'd be amazed what people, when you say it, they'll think, wow, that was pretty rough. You're thinking, man, I thought I was tiptoeing on that one. No, I was tiptoeing with, big ugly bear claws. You weren't tiptoeing on anything. That was a kind of shop tiptoeing. Right. But again, you don't know sometimes what you're coming across as. I think that's the most important part. I think, you've got to be willing to look at yourself, critique yourself, have other people critique you, and you got to have thick skin and just say, yeah, you know what? I need to work on that.
Yeah.
I know I could talk about this type of stuff with you guys for days on end.
For days.
Right?
For days.
So,
yeah.
Coming to an end of this podcast, what would you say are the top 3 things to take away when we're supporting a scaling team?
Comms, I think, is the number one thing. No matter how you do it, you have to keep talking to the team. So you got to play back what you want. You got to hear them play back what they heard. You've got to make sure that, that that you're always on the same page, right? Like you can't push them onto the same, you need to arrive at the same page. So the only way to do that, in my mind, the first thing is comms. If you aren't good at it, find someone in the middle to help you with that, because you need it.
Awesome. Number 1.
Totally agree. Communication's up. Right. And having the ability to evaluate yourself as well as your team, like look in the mirror, like seriously, take a breath of air. Nobody seems to be getting, it's probably you and how you're messaging. Like really,
Definitely.
Ask somebody, okay, this is what I said, and get them to repeat back what they heard.
Exactly. So it's
DEI is big, right? I mean, we all overuse it probably. Then emotional intelligence is a big, it's a big deal.
It's huge. It absolutely is.
It's a big deal.
Not in the sense of a buzzword. It's a big deal
in the sense a big
of
deal.
Vitality of an organization.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
For sure. And to, I guess, throw the third one in the hat there. I think what I heard throughout our conversation is it's really important to look operationally at your organization. So when it comes to skills and competencies, what we may need in the first couple of years could be totally different down the roads. And, having the right tools in place to capture the same, making sure that we have kind of our guardrails in place from a comms perspective. How can we expect to communicate? What are the modes? And from an operational perspective, how do we communicate our strategy? Do we have it written down? Is it on the back of the napkin? Or do we have it fully built out? And how do we communicate that to the team and what parts? And then finally, too, having your general ops in play from both the HR side of things and your day-to-day, I think is really important. Awesome.
What you said, that was very organized.
I'm proud of myself, so I'm normally all over the place.
Ditto. I'm just my kid.
Yeah. What she said.
Yeah.
So before I let you two go, how can our subscribers or listeners find you?
Yeah, so you can so the podcast is called This Commerce Life. So you can go to thiscommercelife.com. You can use that contact page to find us. We're also both of us are highly involved on LinkedIn. We're kind of like on that thing all the time. So you can look for me, Phil Chang, or Kenny Vannucci on there, or This Commerce Life is on LinkedIn as well. So
If you find Phil, you'll find me.
if you find Kenny, you'll find me. So,
I like being with Phil, so I just follow Phil. Whatever Phil does, I'm like that cartoon. Where's Phil? I just follow Phil.
Thank you to both of you for your time this afternoon.
Thanks for having us on.